Welcome back, everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how to edit together raw audio into a completed podcast. And we're going to do this by incorporating other audio clips like background music, and also just cleaning up the recordings you've already made. Editing is actually probably the most fun part of actually working with a podcast because you get to make a lot of decisions that are going to affect the final version of this text. Now, each platform is going to have its own video, so this one is going to cover GarageBand. As a note, I'm going to go through the absolute basics. There are hundreds of other videos on YouTube that talk about making a podcast that show you step by step how to use each of these programs. So please make use of your information literacy skills to find additional information if you need it. This is just going to go through the basics of editing. The first thing that you're going to want to do when you're editing together a podcast is download all of your audio clips to your local computer. So the person who is serving as the editor, you're going to want to go into Teams and actually get those files, and I'll show you how. Here you see I'm in my team sample project again, and in the file section, I have the podcast raw audio. So if I go in there, I see all of the materials that have been contributed by myself and my theoretical team members. To get these onto your own computer is relatively simple. The first option is if you hover over the three dots next to a file, you can individually download those as MP3s or whatever audio file they are to your computer, and they'll show up in your downloads folder. It might look a little different on PC, but I assure you it's essentially the same thing. The other way that's a little bit faster is if you go into your folder and don't select any other items, you'll see this download button. When you click on that, it's going to download a zip file of everything contained in that folder. So right now, it's this OneDrive 2020 zip file. It appears here. If I click on it, or on Windows double click on it, it's going to decompress it into a folder. And so if I open that folder, you'll see now I have all of the same files on my local machine. And that is the first step that you're going to want to take, just that you have all of the raw materials needed to edit together the final version. All right, once you've got all of your audio files downloaded onto your computer, then it's time to actually dive into the editor, in this case, GarageBand. So it should come pre-installed on most Macs. If not, you can get it through the App Store as a free download, and then eventually it will appear in your programs. And so here it's GarageBand. When you open GarageBand, depending upon the version you have, it might look a little bit different, but the options should basically be the same. I like to start with a new empty project just because it just makes it as simple as possible. There are templates, but you can kind of ignore those for the moment. So new project, empty project, and choose it. So that's going to open up the GarageBand editor. Here, you're going to want to select audio file recording using a microphone. It doesn't technically matter which you choose, but this is the easiest way to get set up quickly. Click Create. When you first open up GarageBand, you're going to have a lot of panels and windows open that might not be totally necessary for you. So the first thing I'd recommend is in this control bar up here is unselect this first library button and this smart controls for audio button. And you'll see you have one audio channel, which is already in this case picking up my microphone. You'll also want to go up here and deselect this metronome and count in, just so that you don't have to have an annoying tick-tock going behind your audio as you edit. All right, so now what I'm going to do is actually get the audio files that you downloaded into the program. And so there's a couple ways of doing this, but the easiest is if you take the folder that contains your audio and drag that onto your desktop and open it. What you can then do is take all of these clips, highlight them all, and drag them into your GarageBand interface. And so now you'll see I have all of these audio parts that I've previously recorded. And if I hit play, you're going to hear a lot of noise. That's because they're all on top of one another. So once you get your audio files into the actual text, what you can begin doing is actually organizing where they fall, what you want to have come first. So for me, I'm basically going to set it up so that let's get this part 1 as my opening audio. So have part 1 here. You can click and just drag these around and reorder them all over the place. Part 2, part 3. You can actually zoom out a little bit as well. Let's take part 4, move it here, drag that there. To make your audio composition longer, it should auto expand, but you can also drag this slider up there. It'll appear. Part 4, and then we've got some extra stuff in there just for the heck of it. So we have all of these in a line. And I'm actually just going to get rid of these 2 here. So now you have all of your audio files kind of imported. So basically, the first step is just organizing your raw audio into what comes first, what comes second. And you can actually do it in a different order than you actually recorded it if it makes sense. For example, here I have my outro, part 4. And so with that, I hope you enjoyed the content of this fake podcast, and we'll see you next time. Now, you can record. So that's supposed to be the end, but it's not at the end. So what I can pretty easily do is just click and drag this out, drop it here, and then pull it up into the top so that after my other content.
Save your podcast.
And so with that, I hope you enjoyed the content of this fake podcast, and we'll see you next time. So yeah, so we've got that. We can just you can just drag and select multiple files at the same time if you want to drag them. And so what you can then do is, if you zoom out, we can actually go and pull these things back together to replace the part that I just moved around. And so now you have a new overall order for the podcast. Okay, so what are the things you can do in an editing program? One of the first is you can actually clean up audio quite a bit. So let's listen to this first section again. So revision is crucial. I mean, it's a really important part of any time that you're, well, an important part of any writing task. You're not going to get perfection per se. I mean, it's not like you'll have a perfect draft on the first try, no matter how much we wish that was true. Okay, that's pretty jumbled. It doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. There's a point, but it's kind of buried between a lot of ums and ahs. So essentially what you can do is go and actually edit this and cut out some of these awkward parts. So let's say I want to get rid of that so. If you highlight an audio clip and press Command T, it's going to split that clip. And so I can then just delete this. I can pull this back to the start. And let's see. Revision is crucial. Revision is crucial. I mean, it's a really important part of any. So revision is okay. So I don't like that. It's an important part. So let's say revision is cut there. I mean, it's a really important part of any time that you're, well, an important part of any writing task. Okay, so an important part of it. Let's take this back over here. Perfection is an important part of any writing task. You're not going to get perfection per se. I mean, it's not like you'll have a perfect draft on the first try, no matter how much we. Okay, so task. You're not going to get okay, so perfection per se. I mean, so you're not going to get, and let's cut this again. Perfection per se. I mean, it's not like you'll have a perfect draft on the first. It's like you're going to get a perfect draft on the first try. So remember, Command T is what slices off content. And now, if we play this back, Revision is an important part of any writing task. You're not going to get a perfect draft on the first try, no matter how much we wish that was true. Okay, so I have a lot clearer of a statement. It's simpler. It's something you can do if you have a lot of filler words like an and ah. You can just slice those right out of your podcast and automatically make the audio sound a lot more composed without having to necessarily re-record. All right, so I'm just going to go and drag over all of these audio parts to get it back together. And we'll move on to our next clip. No matter how much we wish that was true. The train wasn't on time, so I was late to work because it really messed up my schedule. Okay, so in this second example, the train wasn't on time, so I was late to work because it really messed up my schedule. And you'll see it doesn't really make any sense with the podcast, but I want to show you how you can actually reorder statements as well. We've got kind of an interesting way of saying I was late to work because the train was late. So let's see. The train wasn't on time, so I was late to work because it really messed up my schedule. Okay, so even this clip, you can reorder that. And so I was late to work. Okay, so I was late to work. Let's say we want to start with that. So I was late to work because it really messed up my schedule. And then because it messed up my schedule, I don't like really that. Messed up my schedule. So I can make another cut with Command T. Just delete that part because I don't really want it. And let's play this again. Let's see how it sounds. So I was late to work because the train wasn't on time. And here you can kind of play around a little bit, but let's slice that off. The train wasn't on time. The train wasn't on. And cut that. Move these together. So I was late to work because the train wasn't on time. Oh, okay. So you see I've gone a little bit too far there. And so I can actually go and drag this back. Because the train wasn't on time. All right, so I was late to work because the train wasn't on time. All right, and there you see how I've even reordered a sentence. I've made it a little bit clearer, a little bit more of an active construction there. This isn't stuff that you need to go overboard with, but I just wanted to highlight the fact that when you're working with audio editing, you have a lot of ability to make changes that are going to affect the final text. You can make the text a lot cleaner, a lot more simplified. You can get rid of those filler words, and you can even just delete sections that are not necessarily working well. It happens. And from listening to those of you that might have recorded using Zoom, there's definitely moments where you're kind of breaking out the script. And this is how you can clean up those sections. You can, even if you have one audio recording that you're working with, you can go in and make these slices, these cuts, to get rid of material that isn't relevant to your podcast. That's a really powerful tool when it comes to doing this kind of work. All right. And so what we might want to do now is talk a little bit about other kinds of audio to incorporate. Now, let's say you want to add in some introductory music, or you want to have other sounds that are part of your podcast that you haven't recorded. The first thing that you're going to want to ensure you don't do is don't use copywritten material. So don't use popular songs, don't use anything that might be under copyright as a whole. So you might think this limits you, but there's actually a number of resources that provide free music. And the simplest to use is YouTube's free music library. So if you go to Google and simply search for YouTube free music library, the audio library at YouTube is going to be the first result. Now, when you click on this, you'll see you've got two tabs here, free music and sound effects. There are hundreds of audio files that you can freely use in your project. This is a safe place to get whatever materials you want. You can also separate them in terms of mood, the instruments that they might be using, the duration, if you want to have a really short intro, genre, all of that. And when you click on them, you'll end up hearing a sample of how those fit together. So if I click on Bird Therapist, I'll get a sample of Bird Therapist. Okay, Okay, not bad. So let's say you want to add this into your podcast. You might want to take a small clip of it and make it your intro music. When you click download, it's going to go to your download folder, much like your own audio files. What you can do is you can take that and drag it to your desktop or into your other folder where you have your other clips, and eventually you'll be able to import that into your audio as well. The same thing is true of sound effects. Let's say you just want to have a little chime sound between different segments that you're working on. Let's do chimes, a dinner bell triangle, okay, magic chime, wind chimes. Let's go with wind chimes. I think, yeah, a little bit of mystical vibes or something like that in my transitions. Same thing. If you click on this little arrow over here, it's going to download it to your computer. I'm just going to go and drag it out to my desktop so I have it handy to import into my file later. And you have at your hands a lot of material that you can use freely and not have to worry about copyright. So you're not going to want to overdo this, and we'll talk about that a little bit when we go back into the editor, but it's a good idea just to think about what kind of ambient noises might you want to have to sort of give a little bit of life to your audio text. And these are all things that you can experiment with and drop in, sample, and then if you decide later on, you can remove them. So that's pretty much it for locating free audio to use. Okay, we're back in GarageBand. You'll see over on the side, I have the two bits of music I downloaded from YouTube's audio library. What do we do with them now? There's a couple ways in which you can use audio in your podcast, and I'll warn you again that you don't want to go too overboard. Not every piece of speaking that you have in the podcast needs to be backed up by music underneath. It's a little overwhelming. It's even a little bit, I would say, overly amateurish. But you do want to occasionally think about where you can include some sounds, some music to provide context. The one is maybe you want to go for a certain vibe under a piece of text that you're, sharing. For example, if you use an anecdote to talk about the severity of the topic that you're discussing, maybe you want to include just some sort of vibey ambience underneath. And there's a couple ways of doing this. The first, you'll see if I drag in Bird Therapist, it'll show up on a different line, and you'll see the song is really long. You don't want to have minutes and minutes of actual music in your podcast. It's not going to actually count towards your, length requirements here, and it's just going to be a little bit breaking or disruptive of the flow. So here I have a piece of audio, and let's play it. Putting together a podcast can actually be a lot of fun because you have a number of choices that you can make. For example, if I want to highlight that the content I'm sharing with you right now is hard. All right, so what do you think is the first problem there? Namely, you can't actually hear what's being said. So in GarageBand, it's relatively easy to adjust this. Let's say we want to just have this clip here have audio underneath it. First off, I'm just going to go and trim this audio in the same exact way as I did before. Just make sure you have it selected, Command T, and you can delete the rest of it. The second thing that you can do is universally, you can adjust a track by moving the slider up or down. So if I were to take it down negative 15 decibels, let's see what this is like now. A lot of fun because you have a number of choices that you can make. For example, if I want to highlight that the content I'm sharing with you right now is heartwarming, then maybe Okay, and so when you use this universal volume slider, any audio that's on this line, on this track, will be reduced in volume. So if I moved my speaking part from the end down to this as well, it's going to be quieter. And so with that, I hope you... As opposed to... And so with that, I hope you enjoyed the... So basically, if you're using that universal overall audio slider here, you just want to make sure that you have it on its own track. There's another way of altering this. Because, for example, let's say you want to actually make it so that after this clip is over, you get this piece of audio back up to its full volume. So first off, we're going to move this back up to here, to this -0. or as close as possible. And if you tap the A key, you'll see you get a different view. And if I click anywhere on this track now, I'm going to get a line. And this is essentially the volume audio line. So let's say I want this track to basically start pretty soft. So I can make a new point by clicking on the line. And then if I click and drag immediately, it brings it down. So that this is going to be, again, about negative 17 decibels below its normal length. And that's all well and fine, because if I play through, putting together a podcast can actually be a lot of fun because you have a number of choices that you can make. For example, if I want to highlight the content I'm sharing with you right now while it's playing, heartwarming, make sure that the audio is actually audible. Music over it. And I make sure that music isn't overwhelming the audio, but it's a little bit of just... So we have that. Now again, maybe we just want a little bit of a transition after this clip is over to lead to the next thing, where we can just say, look at the end here, click, make a dot, click on the edge of it, make another dot, and then click and drag that dot up until it's back to 0. And what this will do, it will be kind of an increase in volume. So it's the opposite of a fade out, that after the audio ends, it gets louder with it, but at the same time, it's something that you can consider. Okay, so that's generally how you make these kinds of transitions. And if you click on a line or a dot, you can generally delete that dot and get back to normal. But that's how you can go about making kind of cool transitions. So let's say you want to use Bird Therapist as your intro, the song that plays you into your episode. Then what you can do, let's move all of these things out a little bit. This back here. Right now, it's at full volume. Alright, so again, if we hit that A key, we'll come into the adjustments view. And much as before, I'm going to decide, okay, so I want to start here, maybe give it a little bit of time to fade out. Click here to where it gets down to its full low volume and drag it down. And it's kind of experimenting. It's experimentation as a whole. And we can drag this down here as well. And eventually even just fade it out entirely when it gets to the end. So this is what it would sound like. Revision is an important part of any writing task. You're not going to get a perfect draft on the first try, no matter how much we wish that was true. So I was late to work because the train wasn't on time. Let's say I want to make this fade out quicker so that the music's already gone. I can just move this dot that's down at 0 or negative infinity. And revision is an important part of any writing task. You're not going to get a perfect draft on the first try, no matter how much we wish that was true. So I was late to work. And that's how you ease audio out. So those are the main tools you can use to make sure that, one, your audio isn't going to overwhelm any of the content that you are saying. So like the music doesn't drown out the actual speakers, your narrator, and just give you a little bit of ambiance underneath certain sections. Again, don't use it under everything. You don't want to have constant sound going in the background. It's more distracting than anything else. But let's say also after, and you can tap A to go in and out of that setting. Let's say after this fades out or ends, what I want to do is add a little bit of the wind chime between these two parts, because the train wasn't on time. So editing together a podcast. Okay, so so we've got these two clips. Let's make a little bit of space here. And for the wind chimes that I downloaded before, same thing. Click and drag it in. I'm going to put on a new line so that it's down here. And let's see how this works out. Because the train wasn't on time. So editing together a podcast can actually be... All right, so you have that little bit of a chime there. If you click on the lower corner and drag in, it sort of just shortens or lengthens a track. So here, we've got the little chime. So editing together a podcast can actually be a lot of... And so that can be any sort of sound transition, little musical cue as a whole. It doesn't necessarily matter. And let's say you don't want to play too much around with fading in and out. There's other ways of doing this too. In most of the videos, I make use of a short audio clip just to introduce the topic. So we're going to go and drag in this sting number 1 here. I'm just going to delete these other things as a whole. Actually, let me put it on its own line here. And now what you can do is essentially just have a little audio intro. Revision is an important part of any writing task. You're not going to get, and so that's another way that you might just find little tiny clips. You also in GarageBand have a really cool tool with the loop browser. And I'm not going to go into too much of this, but if you click on this little loop, they have a number of different just audio samples that you can use. These are all also free to use. Let's say you want to click on here. And so these actually loop, or they could be single play. So if I drag it in to this audio clip here, and get rid of this, you'll see this is now in the audio. Revision is an important part of any writing task. You're not going to get a perfect, and not that you necessarily want to do this under all of your audio, but if you want to make this loop multiple times, if you click on and drag on the upper right-hand corner, it'll automatically loop this sound bite as many times as you want. So it'll just repeat on itself over and over. Writing task. You're not going to get a perfect draft on the first try, no matter how much we wish that was true. So I was late to work because the train wasn't on time. So those are the main tools. And I'm going to kind of leave off there because there's enough in those techniques to get you a really well mixed podcast. It just takes some experimentation and playing around. Also, I'm going to share other resources with you, some other YouTube videos that go into more depth if you want to dig into this a little bit deeper. But with these tools, you can get a perfectly adequate episode. Now, you might be wondering, after all this, how do we actually make this an audio file we can upload? And this is going to be the last thing that I really show you. When you're ready, when you're happy, when you've got everything mixed together and it's good, everything is kind of set, you've got your intro, outro, and all that stuff together. So with that, I hope you what you want to do is go to Share and then Export Song to Disk. And when you click on that, what it's going to do is it's going to let you save this into edited, just an edited podcast. So you could just type whatever the title of your podcast is, whatever your team name is, you just indicate it's edited. It should be by default set to an MP3 file, which is perfectly fine. You can choose where to save it. For me, I'm just going to go put that on my desktop and click Export. So it's going to run through it. And then what you'll see is on my desktop, this file has appeared. And what that is the file that you would eventually be able to share for your final podcast. And if I open it in QuickTime and just play through, you'll hear everything that was in GarageBand. Revision is an important part of any writing. Everything that was there is now in this 51-second audio file. And that's what you would then go and upload. So if I go back into my team site and I go into the file section, what I'm going to do is put a folder, edited podcast, create it, I'm going to go into it, and then I'm going to drag this file in there. And then much like the way that your raw audio was shared with your peers, this is now available for your other teammates to hear. So that is the basics of getting those raw audio files into a single MP3 that would be your podcast, including whatever music or sound effects you also want to include. So at the end of this, I'd say seek out other resources, search on YouTube. I'll provide a few, but have fun, experiment, get feedback from your other team members if you're the editor, and just try to see what you can create. It's really cool when you begin layering different kinds of audio over one another, and it's not hard to make something that sounds pretty interesting. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me via email, and I'll be happy to help you.